Is cooking lentils from scratch worth it, or are pre-cooked lentils good enough? And do cheap lentils taste any different than the fancy, expensive varieties? To help answer these questions, I'll be cooking 3 very different lentil recipes. I'll recreate each recipe using both dried lentils and pre-cooked lentils along different price points, and then evaluate how they compare in terms of cost, convenience, and of course, culinary enjoyment. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what kind of lentils to use in every situation. Oh, before we begin, a quick shout out to fellow YouTuber Ethan Schabowski for popularizing this formatted video. I'll link to a couple of his videos in the description box below. Okay, let's get started. The first recipe we're testing is a lentil salad with fresh herbs. And I wanted to start here because lentils are really at the forefront of this dish, so any differences in texture and flavor across the different lentil types should be pretty noticeable, at least that's what I suspect. In terms of lentil varieties, I like to think of them along 2 different dimensions. On one axis, we have price point, and on the other axis, we have convenience. For this recipe, we're testing with dried black lentils from a grocery store brand, as well as black caviar lentils from Rancho Gordo, a specialty purveyor of heirloom beans and lentils. On the pre-cooked side, we have steamed lentils from Trader Joe's, and finally canned black lentils from West Bray. By the way, to calculate the relative price of each lentil variety, I first determined the volume of lentils we needed for the recipe, 200 grams of dried lentils, which is equivalent to 430 grams of cooked lentils. Then I calculated what percentage of each package I was using in that recipe and multiplied this by the price. For instance, the 365 lentils cost $3.29, but we only need 44% of the package in this recipe, so the effective cost is $1.45. With all of this in mind, we can see that for this recipe, the grocery store dried lentils cost the least, very, very affordable, and the West Bray canned lentils cost the most at $7.58. As you can see, I'm using a mix of black lentils and French green lentils. Both of these varieties work really well in lentil salads because they hold their shape well and don't get mushy when they're cooked. I'm gonna start off by cooking both varieties of the dried lentils, the grocery store lentils and the specialty brand. The grocery store version is gonna go in the pink saucepan, and the Rancho Gordo lentils are gonna go in our stainless steel saucepan so we can keep track of everything. I seasoned both of these very simply, just salt, black pepper, and a bay leaf. And this variety of lentils, in my experience, needs about 17 to 20 minutes to cook. So while those are simmering, I made the flavor base of the lentil salad, which I'll divide across all 4 of our lentil varieties. I sauteed some sliced shallots and garlic in olive oil before adding in some pine nuts, and when everything was beautifully golden, I finished it with Aleppo pepper, fresh lemon zest, and flaky sea salt for just 30 seconds, and then took that off the heat. Smells so good. By the way, if you're interested in making this lentil salad, there is a full YouTube video on it. I've linked it here, and the written recipe is on my website, which I have included a link to in the description box below. Once the dried lentils are al dente, meaning they are tender but still have a bite to them, it's time to drain them, and then we can assemble everything for our taste test. I have 4 identical bowls, and I'm just adding labels to the bottom of each bowl, and then I'll divide this delicious smelling shallot mixture very evenly across the 4 bowls. 50 plus 50 is 100, plus 58 plus 58 is 116? 216. 216 divided by 4. 54? Yes, I know math. 4 grams in both of these bowls. Now it's time to add the 4 different types of lentils to each of their respective bowls. The grocery store dried lentils, the specialty dried lentils from Rancho Gordo, the pre-cooked boxed French lentils from Trader Joe's, and finally the canned black lentils. Once the lentils are well coated in the olive oil shallot mixture, it's time to fold in some fresh herbs. This is a mixture of fresh mint, parsley, and cilantro. And finally, an equal amount of chopped arugula goes into each bowl and gets a final toss. Honestly, these bowls look pretty identical, except for the Trader Joe's one that does look noticeably different. But to make sure that I have no clue which bowl is which, I'm gonna do 2 things. I'm gonna blindfold myself, and then we're gonna mix up the order of the bowls. I feel like I'm gonna need help doing this. Come on over, help me. Okay, we'll start with this one. So the flavor on this is really lovely. The texture is a little soft, not terrible, but I'm not getting individual lentil pieces. It's more like little globs of lentils. This one is interestingly not as flavorful. I think it just needs a little more salt, but it does have more intact pieces of lentil. It's got a little more bite to it. This one has similarly a nice texture where it's like you get individual lentils, but it has a little more flavor than this one. Okay, I'm ready for my thoughts. This one and this one taste very much similar texture-wise and flavor-wise. I can't really perceive much of a difference here. If I were to rank these, I would say these come in first place as a tie. I would probably rank this one number 2, and then this would be a close third. All right, let's take this off and see what's what. Oh my God, it's so bright. I feel like I need to sit down. You need a good sleep mask. That one's it. Let's check our last place bowl first. This is batch D, the Westbury canned lentils. Second place were the Trader Joe's lentil. I can tell you that without even looking because I can see they're a bit mushier, which is what I was tasting. And for our first place, we have the 2 dried lentils. This one is the Rancho Gordo, and this is the 365. There is a ton of flavor in the mixture I use. There's lots of fun textures from the pine nuts and flavors from the Aleppo pepper and lemon zest and the herbs. So I'm wondering if I made a simpler lentil salad, would I notice the flavor and texture differences? But in this particular recipe, I did not. We have 2 more recipe tests coming up, and we're gonna get started with a Mediterranean lentil soup. I am curious to see how pre-cooked lentils hold up in the soup, because in a typical lentil soup with dried lentils, they slowly absorb the broth and the aromatics and spices as they cook. So I want to see if we can get at least somewhat similar results with a canned lentil or a jarred lentil for a little bit of a shortcut. We'll be testing this soup with 4 different lentil varieties. On the dried side, we've got a very inexpensive grocery store brand of lentils. We've got our more specialty dried brown Pardina lentils from Rancho Gordo. And then on the pre-cooked side, we have some canned brown lentils from Trader Joe's. These are very inexpensive for a pre-cooked version. And then our obviously more specialty jarred brown Pardina lentils. These are produced in Spain and they look very fancy. I'm gonna start the soup off by cooking our aromatics and spices. So I've got a diced onion that I'm sauteing in olive oil over medium heat until it is very nicely browned so it can build a lot of flavor. And then we'll add in some diced carrots, minced garlic, and finely chopped preserved lemon peel, which is one of the things that makes the soup extra special. Once the carrots start to soften, in about 5 minutes, you can add the spices. We've got ground coriander and Aleppo pepper, and those need to toast for just 30 seconds. We've got our soup base cooked, so I weighed that out, divided it into 4 equal portions, and got started on cooking batches A and B, which use dried lentils. Into each pan, I added a quarter batch of the soup base, the dried lentils, the vegetable broth, a bay leaf and 5 sprigs of thyme, and 5 twists of black pepper. Once both of these were at a boil, I reduced the heat, covered them, and simmered for 20 minutes. And once the lentils were tender, I removed the herbs and stirred in some nutritional yeast, and just let that simmer for 1 minute. I transferred batch A and B into carefully labeled bowls, so I could reuse those pots for our versions with canned lentils. The Trader Joe's canned lentils went into the pink pot, and the fancy jarred lentils went into the stainless steel saucepan. Since the lentils are already cooked in these batches, I reduced the amount of vegetable broth and simmered the soup for 10 minutes instead of 20. My hope is that this gives the flavors a chance to develop while still saving us time, because that is the primary goal of using pre-cooked lentils. I'm genuinely looking forward to eating 4 bowls of lentil soup. As with test 1, I made sure to add a label to the bottom of each bowl so I would know which bowl contained which lentil at the end of the taste test. So this is batch A in the little pot that I reheated. This is batch B, batch C. All right, I've got these 4 lovely lentil soups in front of me. I don't know how they're gonna taste, but they smell really good. So I'm gonna go grab my blindfold. I'm gonna grab my blindfold and then we'll get to tasting. I guess I'll start here. The flavors are lovely. Really love the preserved lemon. In terms of the lentil texture, it's soft. It kind of just melds into the soup. I don't really even notice like a distinct lentil. So this soup tastes very similar to this one. The difference is the texture in the lentil. This one is more al dente. The lentils in this one seem a little mushy. The flavor's still nice, maybe slightly less nice than these 2, but the main thing I'm picking up is the lentils are mushier. It's not terrible. It's still nice because of the preserved lemon and the Aleppo pepper really shining through, but it doesn't taste like a canned soup because canned soup is terrible, but it tastes amongst these the most like a canned soup, I would say. This one is my favorite, I think. These two I'm a little torn on. I think they probably are close tie for second place. This is a very clear last place. Oh my God, it's so hot, it's sweaty. I'm gonna check our last place winner. I'm gonna check our last place soup. Oh no, it's not a canned soup. This is the batch A. This is the inexpensive grocery brand of dried lentils. That's kind of shocking to me that this was last place because I assumed both of the dried lentils would outperform the canned lentils. And now I'm like, what's gonna happen? Okay, these were a close second place. I liked the creaminess of this lentil. These ones were a little too mushy, but overall I think they were quite similar. This is the Trader Joe's canned lentil. Genuinely shocked that it outperformed the dried lentil. And this is the jarred Pardina brown lentils, the ones from Spain. I really thought the ones from Spain would be like a clear improvement over the Trader Joe's, and if anything, it's just like a slight improvement that I don't think most people would notice. And then this would be the winner. This is the Rancho Gordo lentil, the brown lentil, Pardina brown lentils. Not entirely surprised that those were the best just because they are a more expensive lentil. They're known for their really flavorful lentils and beans. But I am very surprised that the dried lentil from the grocery store was worse than the canned lentils. All right, we have one recipe left. We are gonna make my most popular recipe, my red lentil curry, with 2 types of dried lentils and 2 types of pre-cooked lentils. This recipe is like a creamy, indulgent spin on dal, and it uses red lentils, which break down and get really soft as they cook. Typically, I will just use a grocery store brand of red lentils or whatever the Indian grocery store has, but I am curious to see how a fancier brand of dried red lentils will perform like this. I'm a little skeptical it will make a difference because there's so much good flavor in this recipe already. Now for our pre-cooked lentils, we have the same Trader Joe's canned lentils and these fancy Spanish brown lentils. It is not possible to find pre-cooked red lentils, so these are brown lentils, but they are quite soft, so I think they'll actually work really well in this recipe. The first thing I did was to take both types of dried red lentils and rinse them until the water was clear. As with the lentil soup, I decided to double this recipe just so we'd have enough for each batch. And then I heated up some coconut oil in a frying pan and sauteed our lovely mix of aromatics, garlic, ginger, fresh turmeric, and serrano peppers. And this took about 3 minutes. And then I hit it with the spice blend that features cumin, coriander, curry powder, Indian red chili powder, garam masala, and of course, salt and pepper. And once I had this very potent curry base, I measured it out and divided it into 4 equal portions. All right, we have 184 grams, so we're gonna divide that in 4 portions equally. Can I do the math? 46 grams per portion. As with the other 2 recipes, I'm sticking with the pink saucepan for our grocery store brand of lentils, so I don't get anything mixed up. And I use the exact same quantity of everything for each batch. Added in the rinsed red lentils, the curry base, vegetable broth, and canned crushed tomatoes. I did the exact same thing in the stainless steel saucepan, except I used the Rancho Gordo red lentils. I simmered both of these covered for 20 to 25 minutes. Once the lentils were cooked through, I added an equal amount of canned coconut milk to each batch, followed by an equal amount of almond butter. These add the quintessential richness that everyone loves about this recipe, and these simmered together for 5 to 8 minutes with the lid off. And as you can see, the lentil curry thickens up really nicely into this luscious consistency. Now for the versions with the pre-cooked lentils, I drained and rinsed the Trader Joe's canned lentils. I'm using 1 can total. And I forgot to show you in the last recipe, but these fancy jarred Spanish lentils are actually kind of tough to get out of the jar.
14 hours later.
Since these lentils are pre-cooked, I did make a few changes to the original recipe. One, I added all of the ingredients to the saucepan at the same time. The curry base, the broth, the tomatoes, the cooked lentils, plus the coconut milk and almond butter. The second change is I used only 1/3 of the amount of broth, so the curry wouldn't be too thin. And third, I simmered everything together uncovered for 15 minutes. Enough time for the flavors to hopefully meld together, but not so long that you would lose any time savings from using pre-cooked lentils. I finished each curry with a few squeezes of lemon juice and an equal amount of chopped cilantro before transferring each batch to its labeled bowl. Here we go!
And my assistant, please, will move the bowls for me.
Tasty. That's not the recipe I know and love. It's a little tomatoey and doesn't have as much flavor. I do not like this one. Please God, don't let this be dried lentils because this is the most popular recipe on my blog. Delicious. These two are very good. I cannot really tell any difference between these two. These are both excellent. And I would suspect the ones with dried lentils because they taste like my red lentil curry. I would guess these are the two with the pre-cooked lentils. This is definitely the worst one. Oh, every time it's like I'm entering some fugue state and I'm just getting my bearings. All right, this was my least favorite one. It was too tomatoey and had kind of a strange flavor to it. It's a bit more soupy and less thick and rich. So this is batch C, Trader Joe's canned brown lentils. So this, I'm assuming, is the jarred lentil. Yes, batch D, jarred Rosar brown Perdina lentils. I wouldn't recommend using jarred or canned lentils for this particular recipe based on these taste tests. These ones I couldn't tell the difference, so this is the 365 lentil and this is the Rancho Gordo lentil. These are both dried lentils, and I guess my prediction for this recipe was accurate, that I wouldn't probably be able to tell the difference between the more budget-friendly grocery store lentil and the fancier dried lentil. There's so much flavor from the spices and the aromatics and richness from the coconut milk and the almond butter that you can't tell the difference, which is great. All right, I'm gonna collect all my thoughts and results from all three taste tests and come back with my overall findings on one, whether it makes sense to cook lentils from scratch or if pre-cooked lentils are good enough, at least in certain recipes, and two, if it's worth it to use the expensive lentils or if it doesn't matter. So stay tuned for that. All right, that was a lot of lentils. Let me start off by briefly summarizing our findings from the taste test. Generally speaking, the dried lentils outperformed the pre-cooked lentils in terms of taste and texture, which is what I expected. But that wasn't always the case, and there are actually more situations than I thought there would be where canned lentils or pre-cooked lentils might actually make sense. And I say this as a longtime canned lentil skeptic. So to help you navigate this decision in the future, I've created a few rules for when I think it makes sense to use dried lentils versus canned, and when it might make sense to splurge on a more premium brand of lentils. My first rule is if you are not pressed for time, choose dried lentils. They're almost always going to taste better, have better texture, and they're typically going to be cheaper. The downside, of course, is that they take longer to cook. So depending on what you're cooking, most varieties of lentils are going to take 20, maybe 25 minutes to cook, whereas canned lentils, you just drain and rinse them and they're ready to go. That said, you're not necessarily saving 20 to 25 minutes if you use canned lentils, because a lot of cooking dried lentils is just passive cooking, so you can work on something else in the meantime. I found that the effective time savings of using canned lentils over dried lentils is closer to 10 to 15 minutes, so really not that much. My other rule is if you are planning to cook your lentils very simply without a lot of seasonings, it is really important to use dried lentils. All the three tests I performed actually had quite a bit of flavor, so I couldn't help myself. I did a bonus taste test and I cooked two varieties of dried lentils very simply, just salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. And then I drained some canned lentils and I finished everything with a little bit of olive oil and lemon juice. And in this test, I could really notice the differences. The Rancho Gordo lentils had a nice, robust flavor that was enjoyable to eat. The dried lentils from the grocery store were good enough, and the canned lentils definitely were lacking in flavor and texture, just kind of an overall boring one-note experience. So when you're keeping things simple, it does really make a difference to use dried lentils. After all these tests, I have changed my mind a bit on canned lentils. I used to think there was no place for them at all, that they were kind of useless, but they did perform better than I thought they would, at least in the lentil soup and in the lentil salad. So I think they can be a good addition to your pantry, primarily on those days when you need to save time. So if you've got a busy day at work, or you're trying to cook dinner while also parenting your child and you don't want an extra saucepan to pay attention to, these are a good option to have on hand because you'll still get pretty decent results. There is a caveat, however. Most lentil recipes you'll find online and in cookbooks use dried lentils. So if you want to use canned lentils, you have to figure out all the conversions, how much of the canned lentil to use, what liquid amount to change, what seasonings to use. So you kind of are just hoping that it will turn out. So the bottom line is I am no longer against using canned or pre-cooked lentils. They wouldn't be my first preference, but I do think they deserve a place in your pantry for those busy days. Just don't use them in the red lentil curry. That is my next rule. Just make that recipe the way it's intended to be made. Now let's talk about price. If you are making a recipe that has a lot of other flavors, you can usually get just as good results with a grocery store brand of dried lentils as you can with a more premium brand of dried lentils. In the lentil curry and in the lentil salad, I didn't notice a difference between the fancy Rancho Gordo lentils and the grocery store lentils. They were both very delicious. That said, there is a lot more variability in lentils that you'll find at the grocery store. For instance, I've been cooking with Rancho Gordo lentils and beans for years, and I've never had a bad batch or an old bag that just refused to cook. In contrast, you can occasionally get sometimes at the grocery store a really old bag of lentils that just will never soften or kind of just doesn't taste that great. That's what appeared to happen with our Mediterranean lentil soup, where the grocery store budget dried lentil performed the worst, even behind the canned lentils. Another reason you might want to splurge for a more premium brand of lentils is if you like to cook your lentils very simply. Maybe you meal prep a big pot and then you mix and match them with different things during the week, which is something I do sometimes. In that case, you will definitely taste the difference in a grocery store brand of lentils versus a fancier brand of lentils. So if that's something you like to do, it might be worth it to spend the extra money in that case. Now for pre-cooked lentils, these are typically going to be more expensive than their dried counterparts. And I just don't think it makes sense to splurge on a more expensive canned brand or jarred brand. If you do want to splurge, just buy the fancier dried lentils. Take the extra 10 or 15 minutes to cook them. You'll get better flavor and texture, and you will actually save money even though you're getting the fancier dried brand. If you enjoyed this deep dive into lentils, check out this video where I did the same thing for canned beans versus dried beans, budget beans versus fancy beans. I think you will enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!